Gray's Elegy with you. I've done that poem. Now we have this particular novel, and some of the poems are also there, like Tintern Abbey, Kubla Khan, My Last Duchess. So we have to do that, those poems also. But for our present class, let me introduce to you uh, Charles Dickens as a novelist in the Victorian period. From your reading of the history of English literature, you know that the Victorian age is actually famous for its novels, its novelists, and the two very powerful novelists in the Victorian period are, of course, Charles Dickens, whose novel Oliver Twist we will be reading, and William Makepeace Thackeray. So they are the two very powerful novelists. There are, of course, such other novelists as George Eliot, Anthony Trollope, uh, and some other, uh, not so important novelists like Charles Reade, and others are there. Now, as you know that if we need to understand a text, if we need to understand a text, then obviously we would have to first, what we have to do is we have to know something about the background, about the age in which it has been written. So Oliver Twist, this novel, as you know, Charles Dickens wrote a number of novels. He is famous for his novels, and this is the second novel that he had written, and this was published in a serial form in a magazine called the Bentley's Magazine from 1837 to 1838, and it came out as a full-fledged novel in 1839. So considering that, we have to know about the society, the background, when this particular novel was written. Now, during those times, as you know, Dickens was born in 1812, and during those times, Europe was going through, actually, it had already gone through the Napoleonic Wars, and it had gone through the Napoleonic Wars, and of course the French Revolution had occurred in 1789, as you would remember. So there were quite a few changes that were taking place in England. Among these changes, there was the increase in population and the effect of industrialization. So these were two very important things that happened. And of course, those actually meant that uh, more and more people started to come in from the villages to the towns, to the city of London. It may be compared to what happened to our country after the partition or just before the partition, how people started coming in. So the situation was like that. People started to come in from the villages to the towns in search of jobs because they could not get any job in in the villages. So that is something that we have to keep in mind. And there were certain other things also which happened. There were some writers, a writer called Robert Owen, who in his work, A New Way of Society, he stressed on the need for educating the poor. And of course, that was one of the major voices during that time. And Dickens was, right from his early years, he actually, when he started to write novels, he was in fact protesting against different social ills. And he was, of course, talking about the need for looking after the orphans. And there were certain utilitarianists like John Stuart Mill and Jeremy Bentham. They were quite famous writers who wanted to tackle the problem of poverty, and they sort of formulated a kind of a theory which enunciated that the greatest happiness of the greatest number was required. But Charles Dickens did not agree to this. In fact, he disagreed with this, and he felt that if this policy was adopted, then the marginalized people, the poor people, they would be victimized. So he actually criticized the views of Jeremy Bentham and John Stuart Mill in some of his novels. Now, there had been some laws in existence. There had been some laws in existence which talked about the need for taking care of the poor people. Now, among the people who would be taken care of were certain persons who were old people, who were sick, and disabled people. So these were some of the persons who would be taken care of by the government. So obviously, as you can see, please mute yourself, Rohina. Rohina, please mute yourself. So as we can see that these laws were there, and the orphans, that is children who did not have their parents, whose parents were dead, they were trained for a trade, and the people who could work, they were given work. Now the Poor Law Act was there. The Poor Law Act, that was there from the year 1601. And later on, the Poor Law Act of 1834, that came into existence. And this Poor Law Act of 1834 declared that the able-bodied poor should not be given assistance, because it meant the wastage of public money. And a law was passed according to which those who were not able to support themselves could be forced to leave and work in the workhouses. So Charles Dickens was really against this. And the married people, they were separated. The children, they were neglected. and a starvation diet was sort of formulated. So the picture of Oliver, little Oliver, who was an orphan, when the novel opens, you will see when you read the novel. I would ask you to start reading the novel because it is quite a long novel. I'll give you the outline, chapter-wise summary, but you should be reading the novel really, not just rely on summaries. So Oliver is an orphan and he is placed in this workhouse, and he has to work there for his living. And the time was like this, and the character of Mr. Bumble, who is in charge of the workhouse, that is also a kind of a portrayal of the cruel officers who were there. So Dickens was writing about a period when there were certain these things were happening, and he was in fact protesting against these things. Now we will look at the plot of this novel. That is Oliver Twist, the plot of Oliver Twist, and what Dickens was trying to show here. So first, let us look at the way it was published. Oliver Twist was published in a serial form, as I have told you, and it is Dickens's second novel. The first one was Pickwick Papers. So Dickens's first novel was Pickwick Papers, and Oliver Twist was his second novel. Now Oliver Twist, actually it is about a little boy who is named Oliver Twist, a little orphan boy, and there is an alternative title to this novel, that is A Parish Boy's Progress. That is the alternative title to this novel. Now from February 1837 onwards, it started to appear in Bentley's magazine, and it was finished and it was published in book form in November 1838. And we can see that in the preface to Oliver Twist, Dickens has enunciated, he has told his readers his purpose, his objective in writing this novel. Why was he writing this novel? The fact that he wanted to show in the boy Oliver the principle of good, surviving through every adverse circumstance. So Oliver was the embodiment of good. He was the embodiment of good, and he would have to suffer right from his birth because his father was already dead and his mother would soon die after giving birth. So he would become an orphan and he would be brought up in this workhouse in very cruel circumstances, in very adverse circumstances. Now, but ultimately, after a lot of suffering, he would be placed in the hands of an unprincipled and unscrupulous Jew named Fagin, who actually is a person who trains young boys to become pickpockets, so to become thieves. And Oliver would have to spend some time in his den, and his half brother monks would try to harm him and try his best so that Oliver would be hanged after committing burglary or thievery. So like that. So Dickens was obviously trying to show in Little Oliver the principle of good, and he has certainly succeeded in his purpose, because though we can see in this novel that though Oliver goes through a number of hardships, he encounters evil persons, but there is vicious people all around him, but he is generally untouched. He is generally untouched by these evils. And Dickens points out that uh, actually he did not want to glorify these thieves and these pickpockets and burglars. And there were certain novels certain novels that were popular during those times, and those were called the Newgate novels, which glorified these burglars, these thieves. So the evil characters, they were portrayed in attractive colors. But this novel, Oliver Twist, would try to show the dark side of the London underworld. And Dickens largely succeeded in portraying the evil side of London, and how these evil people, they were ultimately punished, who wanted to harm little Oliver, and ultimately Oliver triumphs. So this is the objective of the novel, what Dickens wanted to show in this novel. Now the plan or the plot of the novel, of course, uh, it defines the the story as such. And as we can see that the novel Oliver Twist has a loose kind of plots with some, you know, uh, some incidents which happens by chance, So a critic like Arnold Kettle, he has criticized this, that uh, there are a number of chance happenings, extraordinary coincidences are there, and that is why some kind of the plot suffers. So what we can see that the novel has actually two worlds. The one is of the workhouse, the thieves, and the contrasting comfortable world of the Brownlows and the Maylies. So the contrasting worlds are there, the two worlds. So darkness and light, that is contrasted. And Dickens largely succeeded in portraying the underworld, London underworld, and he, especially in the case of Nancy, who is a fallen woman, uh, he evokes sympathy for Nancy in the hearts of the readers. And he evokes sympathy for the orphan children who had to spend their lives in these workhouses, children like Oliver Twist. So the plot actually is like this, and uh, the cruelty of the people who were in charge in the workhouses, that is very vividly portrayed, and how he is persecuted when he asks for more gruel. There is a famous scene in the novel when Oliver wants more. He asks, or he dares to ask for more gruel. That is soup. He wants to ask, wants to get a little more food. So the plot actually, as we can see, it is a criticism of the workhouses. It is a criticism of the London underworld, and it is a celebration of young Oliver's virtues. Young Oliver, how he triumphs over, uh, all the evil things. This is, in fact, the kind of plot that Dickens excelled at creating. In many of his novels, later on, starting from Oliver Twist, you will find that Dickens emerges as a social critic. And Oliver Twist is one of the first, it's the first novel that starts this trend. Dickens's role as a social reformer or a social critic. So, as we can see, I'll give you a summary of the novel, chapter by chapter, and a list of the characters, because there are a number of characters in this novel, which, of course, you will have to know. So, I will tell you the story very briefly. For those of you who do not know anything about the story, I'll give you a plot summary. Now, the novel begins with the birth of Oliver Twist in a workhouse. Actually, what we see that his mother dies after giving birth to him, and we learn later that Oliver actually is an illegitimate child because his parents were not married. Now, so there is a mystery about his parentage. Who is his father? That is something that is left unsaid by the novelist. And as a child, Oliver suffers a great deal at the hands of those who manages this poor workhouse. And Dickens, as I told you, he gives us a vivid picture of the situation prevailing there. After some years, Oliver is apprenticed to an undertaker called Sowerberry. Now, an undertaker is a person who builds or makes coffins for dead people. So he is a person who makes coffins, and Oliver is apprenticed there. Now, he is mistreated there, and by an older boy called Noah Claypole, and he runs away to London. And at the outskirts of the city, when he is about to enter London, he meets a boy who is slightly older than himself, and he lures Oliver with the promise of helping him. And he takes him to the Jew, Fagin, F-A-G-I-N. So Fagin is the person who is an old Jew who is engaged in the task of training, young boys to become pickpockets, pocketmar. So they are being trained to become pickpockets right from their young age. And there he meets some other boys, and there comes a man called Bill Sykes, who is a burglar and a housebreaker, and a young woman called Nancy. who is a prostitute. But Oliver, of course, is not aware of their real natures, and he's an innocent boy, and he's trapped when he's taken on a thieving expedition by two other boys, by the artful Dodger, as he is called, uh, the boy who had taken Oliver to Fagin's den, and another boy. And Oliver is caught because he is an innocent child, and he is taken to the court where he faints. And the person who was being robbed, Mr. Brownlow, that is his name, he takes pity on him and he takes him to his home. And he is surprised, that is Mr. Brownlow is surprised when he notices a similarity with the picture that hangs in the room where Oliver escaped to recover. But after some time, when Oliver has regained his health to some extent, and he has been living in the house of Mr. Brownlow, what happens is that he is recaptured because Fagin arranges for his recapture by Nancy and another girl, and Fagin is afraid that Oliver will reveal the whereabouts of the gang. And when Oliver goes on an errand to a bookshop, Nancy easily catches him and takes him back to Fagin's den. Now, after coming back there, of course, Oliver has to stay there, and he is taken by Bill Sikes on a house-breaking mission. So, Bill Sikes needs a small boy who would be able to sort of go into the house through a small window. So only a small boy would be capable of doing that. And Oliver is just the right size, kind of the right stature. So he would be used to go into the house and unlock the door so that the housebreakers like Bill Sikes and the others can enter. But the household people, they come to know of the burglary, they wake up and they fire at the burglars, and Oliver is wounded, and he is again kind of taken care of by the Maylies. And actually, Rose Mayley is Oliver's aunt because she is Oliver's mother's sister. Agnes's sister. Oliver's mother's name was Agnes. So ultimately, Oliver is reunited with his family, and Mr. Brownlow, who is a friend of the Maylies, he puts out an advertisement for the inquiring about Oliver, and the Bumbles, Mr. Bumble and Mrs. Bumble. You will recall that Mr. Bumble was the caretaker of this workhouse. He was a parish beadle who looked after he was not the caretaker, but he was the parish beadle, meaning he was the officer who was responsible for looking after the workhouse orphans so that they would be taken care of. And they come to visit Mr. Brownlow, and they say all kinds of evil things about Oliver. Of course, Mr. Brownlow does not believe them. Now, Mrs. Maylies' niece Rose is in love with Harry, the son of Mrs. Mayley, but she refuses to marry Harry because she is afraid that the mystery about her birth may hamper his progress. And she shows great affection for Oliver and takes care of him. Later, we see how Nancy meets Rose Mayley, and they have a kind of a conversation, and Oliver's secret about his birth is revealed. His half brother Monks is actually punished. Actually, he goes away, and Bill Sykes is sort of he's accidentally hangs himself when a mob chases him. And in this way, the story comes to an end with Oliver growing up in the house of Mr. Brownlow. Mr. Brownlow adopts him as his own son, so as his adopted son. Fagin, at the end of the novel, he is arrested and he is hanged. And before being hanged, he agrees to reveal the the facts of Oliver's parentage. And ultimately, Rose and Harry Maylie, they are married, and as I have said, Oliver is adopted by Mr. Brownlow as his son. So everything ends happily for Oliver here. So the fact that Oliver Twist was an orphan, and he started his career as a very poor and neglected child, and he was in fact being brought up in this workhouse. Later he falls into the hands of this gang of thieves and burglars who try to use him for their own ends. And ultimately, as Dickens had enunciated in the preface to his novel, he ultimately shows how little Oliver he ultimately surmounts. He is able to surmount all the hardships, all the difficulties in his path, and ultimately he emerges triumphant. So the theme of this novel, and actually it is not the story, but the story is a kind of a loosely connected one. As I have said, many critics have commented on the fact that the plot of Oliver Twist is very loose, and it is not a very strong plot because there are a number of loose ends and coincidences. But this novel, like many of Dickens's other novels, this novel has continued to be popular after it was serialized in Bentley's Miscellany rather. So as we can see that obviously Dickens was trying to examine these characters. He had two things in his mind. He wanted to show Oliver's innocence, the fact that virtue will ultimately triumph, though Oliver was an illegitimate child born in a workhouse and brought up in adverse circumstances. Actually, he will triumph. He will not be touched by the evils that surround him. So that is the first thing that Dickens wanted to show. And also he wanted to show the London underworld and the fact that there was some good in even the so-called evil people. For example, in the character of Nancy, he has shown that it was only Nancy in Fagin's den who showed some kind of affection for Oliver. So when Bill Sykes wanted to harm Oliver, it was Nancy who tried to protect him. Ultimately, she had to die at the hands of Bill Sykes. So that is something that, of course, Dickens has shown here. And we can see that Dickens's novels like his other novels, Hard Times, Bleak House, Little Dorrit, uh, then some other novels, Nicholas Nickleby, Bleak House, as I have mentioned, they have taken up certain social issues and a kind of a humanitarian approach. So Dickens was a novelist with a purpose. He wanted to attack in each of his novels some kind of evil during his time, and he wanted to arouse his readers' anger. His readers would protest against these evils. So that was his, you know, that was his objective. That was what he wanted to do. And Dickens was always the supporter of the marginalized people, the poor people, the outcast, and the weak people, the oppressed. So he is a kind of a humanitarian person in all his novels. So here in this novel, he wanted to attack the cruel people who were showing a lot of hard-heartedness against orphans such as Oliver. So organized charity, the charity that was being done, that was not really charity because it was really cruelty that was practiced in the workhouses against the orphans and the paupers. They were treated in a most inhuman and barbarous manner. And Mr. Bumble, who is the beadle, he is an embodiment of callousness. He is an embodiment of cruelty, uh, which were practiced in the workhouses of the time. So Dickens has criticized these people. He has criticized all these people through this novel, and he has tried to bring some kind of sympathy for these unfortunate orphans. And he, as we have seen, with his portrayal of the board of trustees, the chairman, uh, uh, and how the court, when he's brought into the court, Mr. Fang, who is the judge, he is also cruel towards Oliver. So all these things are there, and this novel actually, it is an exposure of poverty and the destitution of the people. So a condemnation of the way in which extreme poverty rages. It raged during Dickens's time, during those times, and the ways it could be removed. But Dickens did not, as such, offered any solution to this, but he was merely pointing out, he was merely showing us, showing his readers, and his readers were quite large in number. So Dickens was only interested in raising these issues. Such issues which would raise anger, which would really be dealt with, and that would raise and form public opinion against these wrongs. And thus, the theme of poverty, the theme of the underworld London, the workhouses, the Poor Law Act of 1834, which was in fact a very cruel law. So all these things are being criticized in this novel. And the judicial system, the working of the courts of law, is also being criticized. And Dickens is very satirical. He often uses satire and irony in order to depict the trials that were taking place in the court of law. So he laughs at the court magistrate, Mr. Fang, who is a most inefficient and whose attitude towards the accused is far from judicial. So the name or the surname Mr. Fang, it is also very suggestive. So it is suggestive of callousness of the man's character, his cruelty. So when Oliver, as I told you, when he is produced before him, he uh, actually he thinks that Oliver is a pickpocket. He has picked the pocket of Mr. Brownlow, though of course Oliver is innocent. And therefore he says, stuff and nonsense, do not try to make a fool of me. So he is very confident about his own judgments. Later on, towards the end of the novel, when Fagin's gang is arrested and the artful dodger is being charged with pickpocketing, he says contemptuously, this ain't the shop for justice. So he says clearly that he does not expect any kind of justice from the judges or from the administration. So Dickens found the judicial system of his of contemporary England to be defective. So he has attacked the judicial system in a way. And regarding the theme, we can, of course, as I was telling you, he has exposed the crimes, the vices of the times, how young boys like Oliver, they were recruited, they were taken in by such evil persons like Fagin the Jew, who tried to make them into pickpockets. They were trained in criminal acts, in becoming experts in performing criminal acts. And also the character of Bill Sikes, who is a housebreaker, and activities of William Sikes or Bill Sikes and Toby Crackit. So who is Bill Sikes's accomplice, his helper. So all these robberies, kind of, so that were committed, and Dickens is very successful in showing the the London underworld. So the novel is basically about two things. It is about how virtue will ultimately triumph over evil, and how the London underworld functions. So these are the two things that Dickens wanted to show to his readers through this novel. So this class was a kind of an introductory class on Oliver Twist. I wanted to introduce you to the novel as such, and what was Dickens's purpose in writing this novel. Dickens, as I told you, was regarded highly as a social reformer because he presented certain social ills, certain social problems, social evils in his novels, and he brought to the notice of the general public who were his readers. And he was an extremely popular writer, popular novelist. As you must be knowing, he was the most popular novelist during the Victorian period, and a kind of a social awakening. He wanted a kind of a social awakening in the minds of his readers. So Dickens is not offering his readers any remedies, or he is not suggesting any way, any method of removing the evils which he is exposing, but he is actually what he is trying to do. He is bringing to the fore. He is acting as a kind of a presenter of these situations. He is pointing out these evils which were rampant during those times, and he leaves it to the police, to the guardians of the law in society, to take the necessary measures to combat these evils. So the value, uh, ultimately, what is the value of a novel like Oliver Twist? Since Dickens uh, does not have the power to change or to reform himself, the evils. Actually, the value of the works of Dickens lies in the fact that his novels brought about a social awakening in the society during those times, and a social awareness. So the people, they read his novels and they became aware of what kinds of evils that were there, and the much needed stimulus or incentive to reform those the society. So public opinion was raised in this way by Charles Dickens through his novels. And as you know, in this particular novel, through the character of Oliver, Dickens was always interested in children and in the innocence of children. And in this way, he is similar to the poet, the romantic poet William Wordsworth, whose poem Tintern Abbey we'll be reading. Now, William Wordsworth also believed in the innocence of the child, the fact that a child is close to God because a child has come from heaven, and the child has a connection with the divine powers. So Dickens was also of this opinion, and in his novels he has presented different children like uh, the Marchioness, who is a small girl in the old curiosity shop, uh, of course Oliver in Oliver Twist. Then there is a little girl called Little Dorrit in a novel by the same name, and there are other characters, uh, children who are presented in his novels. And so obviously Dickens wanted to present them as symbols of goodness which would triumph in spite of all odds. So he's showing that they are being exposed to evil, but they are not being touched by evil. They are not participating in the wrong acts. So in the case of Oliver, he is brought up, he is shown how uh, he should pick the pockets of gentlemen. That is the training that is given by Fagin to his gang of boys. But Oliver remains unaffected, and he never becomes a criminal. So that is the essential message that is given in this novel. So in this introductory class, I have given you some kind of an idea. I hope you have understood what was the purpose of Dickens's purpose, what was the theme and the plot of this novel, and the storyline. I tried to tell you, though very briefly, because it is difficult to summarize a big novel like Oliver Twist, which has so many different aspects, so many different themes. And I hope you have followed. And in our next class, which would be on Monday, I would continue with this. I will analyze the character of Oliver and how Oliver is represented as a symbol of good